So, welcome back to Third Age Reforged and to another battle replay and to another custom scenario created by Froggy actually, albeit this one was actually sent to me by Eclipse, so it's starting to get a little bit confusing as to who actually has made these scenarios, so I will have to make a point of asking that whenever someone gives me such a replay in the future. This is a rather interesting one. It's a rather unique one in this, well, I suppose, we had a somewhat similar one, albeit in a different format, about a month ago by the time this video comes out, and that is that it is a full Hobbit army which is instigating a rather large-scale ambush upon a large Misty Mountains force down in the basins. There's going to be a lot of numbers on the battlefield today. The Hobbits, of course, are a relatively numbers-heavy faction. The Misty Mountains are the numbers-heavy faction in the game, so it's going to be a bit of a mosh pit down here in this valley. Not quite sure what the context of this would be. I'm sure that there was some instances of the Hobbits actually fighting in Middle-earth, albeit that was alongside the men of Arnor, not in any sort of capacity like this where they themselves set up a really huge ambush on a goblin force that was down here in the valleys. Nonetheless, I suppose, I'm not sure which army to do first. I guess because they're being ambushed, the Misty Mountains are technically the ones on the defence today. So, we'll go through the Hobbits first and foremost, all the way around this valley. Morris is one of the Hobbit leaders today, and he has got some long bottom mob. Very low damage, but armour-piercing projectiles, and they of course have those Fred Flintstone-style clubs that they carry on their backs as well, so they should be quite useful actually at dealing with the rank-and-file goblins. The farmers of Buckland, with their huge AP values actually, considering their charge, are actually going to be really good at dealing with even some of the bulkier Uruk units that the Misty Mountains have at their disposal. More long-bottom mob, and some Tookish hunters as well. Of course, considering the situation, the way that the Hobbits have to win this is going to be based on their range support, because they have plentiful ranged units that they can utilise, and the Misty Mountains are going to be caught in the crossfire, very much so you would imagine. Joey One Kenobi is another of the Hobbit folk leaders. He has got several units of Tookish hunters here up on the cliffs as well, the more basic of the Hobbit archers. Although to be fair, what the BANDOBRAS archers gain is actually more of a melee component and more of an armour component, more so than significant damage boosts, even though that is there. Bjornings are here, so they can of course charge and break up a Misty Mountains charge to stop them from getting to the Hobbit skirmishers. Hobbitry and arms are of course just going to be there to get in the way as well. I believe they still have their armour piercing, which means they could still be quite useful against the lower level heavy goblin units as well. We saw in the last replay that featured a lot of Hobbits how important the Proudfoot Protectors can be to their chances of winning. Eclipse, of course, also a part of this battle, sending me the replay as well. The pike-crossbow combination is such a potent mix, and it will be here as well, because their bolts are going to be really, really important for taking down especially the higher tier Misty Mountains units. There are the farmers of Buckland, more Proudfoot Protectors, more Hobbitry and arms. Several units of the battling Brandybucks, which are a little bit more basic than the farmers of Buckland, but they are still ultimately an armor-piercing shock infantry unit, so they still will be useful against a lot of the goblin roster, for whom they don't really have much melee defense. The limited armor they have is really the only way they have of keeping themselves alive over a longer period of time. Joey has got some farmers of Buckland over here. We also have the firework launcher, which I believe is getting a new model in the upcoming patch. I think White in the Black Cloud has been making a few siege weapon models which all look pretty nice, and the Gandalf's fireworks will be differentiated from the Hwacha of Khand as a result, but of course mechanically it will still be very much the same, and they have a golden opportunity to do a lot of damage and to bombard the Misty Mountains as they sit there. BANDOBRAS archers, we can see there their clubs and their chain shirts as well, so they are a little bit bulkier and a little bit more dangerous in melee, especially to someone like the Misty Mountains. Brandybucks, the Dunedain are here as well. Dunedain Rangers with their body piercing can of course be as useful as ever, especially in a situation like this where the Misty Mountains are all set up for you to ambush them. Several units of Hobbitry and arms just further back. Another unit of Dunedain Rangers from Morris. Proudfoot Protectors are here battling Brandybucks. More Brandybucks, and another unit of Proudfoot Protectors as well. There's a few units down here on slightly lower terrain, some farmers of Buckland and Hobbitry and arms that are hiding, ready to ambush the Misty Mountains as they try to climb out of their little hidey holes. Speaking of which, we already have some firing going on from Eclipse's Proudfoots over here. Be interesting to see what they're going after. Longbottom mob are already in range as well, so it goes to show the distance bonus that you get from being on higher terrain, especially when it's as steep as this. Farmers of Buckland, Hobbitry and arms as well. And now we start to make our circuit around can see there's more farmers, more hobbitry and arms. The hobbit infantry in particular is relatively basic in what it offers. Tookish hunters are up here. Of course, with being so scattered, the Misty Mountains could bring down some of these more isolated elements of the hobbit army relatively easily. They've almost got like Mongol-style recurve bows, the Tookish hunters, which is quite interesting. There's more Tookish hunters. It could just be a model that they imported directly from the Timurids, I suppose, from Standard Medieval 2 or the Mongols themselves. Hobbitry and arms are here, and up here we also have some cavalry, some sheriffs of the Farthings ready to sweep in. Not exactly the Rohirrim this, but in the later periods of the game they could still be really useful for hitting and running with their stones and then getting some last desperate charges off if that is what is required. Some more sheriffs of the Farthings over here, a little bit of a scattered unit there. We have some great eagles as well, so the eagles will come later into the fight. Extremely devastating charge, but that is all they have as a unit. They can only charge. It's a really bizarre kind of setup that they have mechanically. Hobbitry and arms are there. And the final little wing of this ambush, we've got some Tookish hunters, more Tookish hunters, and then there's some more hobbitry and arms and farmers of Buckland hidden in that little divot. So, now we shall move on to the Misty Mountains, who find themselves on the receiving end of this. I'd imagine their infantry force is actually probably going to be better. They have got some heavy goblin archers. Getting into a position where they can actually skirmish without taking several volleys first is going to be quite hard for them, however. And while they are armoured to an extent, they're not the best in a skirmish fight. The hobbits will have the edge there. Heavy goblin infantry. They're going to have to be really careful of all of the armour piercing that the hobbits bring to the table, but they're just going to be more of a support for the more scary stuff. The cave trolls, for example, could be really useful for battering through the hobbit infantry forces and getting at those crossbows and shutting them down for a period of time, which will be very important, I think, for the Misty Mountains if they are to win. This is Froggy's army, I'm not sure if I mentioned. Several units of heavy goblin spears as well. The armour piercing on this unit usually is actually a real boost. Less so against the hobbits. There are a few units in the hobbit roster which have got some decent armour, like the Proudfoots, the BANDOBRAS archers, but ultimately it's rather like the lightly armoured elven factions, where the armour piercing, it doesn't hurt, but it doesn't really help any either. Heavy goblin halberds will be useful for the phalanx, however. As long as they can avoid the Proudfoots, they should be able to hold the hobbits at bay. White Orc fearmongers, as well as some more heavy goblin spears in there. Froggy's general is going to be a part of the Goblin King's bodyguard. Several units of Mountain Uruk host, which vastly outclass most of the hobbit units in melee in terms of sheer bulk, but the hobbits of course can outmaneuver them and use their armour piercing to good effect, and ultimately they can of course use stuff like crossbows and thrown projectiles on them as well. Frodor Baggin, who ironically enough is not playing on the hobbit side, he's playing as a goblin, has got some heavy goblin archers as well. More heavy goblin infantry, unsurprisingly. Heavy goblin spears, Mountain Uruk host. I'd imagine these armies are fairly similar. This could be a problem for the hobbits, though. Definitely a unit they want to try and focus down as quickly as they possibly can are the heavy goblin crossbows. If they get in range, they could prove to be a real problem for some of the more important hobbit units, especially with their infantry. Halberds and infantry, a classic combination of the Misty Mountains. Not a lot of it cost, but potentially a lot of time for holding the line. More White Uruk fearmongers, another unit of heavy goblin infantry again. There's not... In terms of survivability, the hobbits don't really have a unit of infantry that's like this. The Proudfoots kind of are, but that's more because they don't take damage because their pikes keep units away from them. Whereas the heavy goblin, the Goblin King's bodyguard are of course multiple HP. More Mountain Uruk host over here. Then we have Mevin, who has got some heavy gobbo spears. We have got some more heavy gob spears, some heavy goblin infantry, plenty of heavy goblin units for him. Heavy goblin spears again. So the sheriffs of the Farthings will need to be careful. Cave trolls, lots of heavy goblin infantry. Mr. Sneakman over here as well. Some crossbows, some halberdiers, infantry, Snaga skirmishers, so he's got his own javelins to answer the hobbit menace with. And then Angmar at the back. So actually it is a 3v5, so I suppose the hobbits, they really do need to make the most of their position because there are 5 armies here, and infantry-wise, these guys down here in the valley will be able to force their way through them without too many issues. Halberds, Goblin King's bodyguard, Mountain Uruk host, pretty much what you'd expect. Madexa as Angmar, you'd imagine him to have slightly more of a scary army. Upgraded Guardians of Khan Doom. The Gundabad Guard are certainly bulkier spears than the heavy goblin spears, and with the armour piercing not being so useful, definitely the superior of the units. Angmar Marauders not much different from the heavy goblin infantry, to be honest with you. Witch Realm Hammer Guard are scary, as are the Black Guard. More Angmar Marauders up there. Some Warg Skirmishers in the back as well. 2 units of them which could be used to sweep across the hills and try and do damage there. But I suppose we shall get over to here to see what all of these archers are going to be firing at. And without further ado, let's begin. Oof, that frame rate though. There's always a bit of a... Oh no, we're on times 6 speed, that's why. What am I doing? Incredible. Amateur hour at work. But, plenty of projectiles already being loosed. And straight away, of course, the Orcish and Goblin factions are going to have to try and make their way up here to shut down as much of these firing lines as possible. Now, the main bulk of the Hobbit army is at the far end of the valley, including their artillery. But first and foremost, it'll be interesting to see how long the Hobbits can hold these armies at bay for. These Tookish hunters need to start firing with reckless abandon, to be honest with you, so that they can do as much damage to those Goblin forces as they possibly can, because these Tookish hunters are not going to last very long. You may as well just use up all the ammunition in whatever way you can, because these Goblin forces are going to very, very easily overwhelm and overrun. In fact, we are going to go down to half speed here because there's going to be a lot happening very, very quickly in this battle, I think. Farmers of Buckland do get a charge off, which will give them a good leg up against a single unit of heavy Goblin spears, but the problem here is there's so many Goblins on the field that it won't just be a single unit of heavy Goblin spears. There are these Hobbitry and arms as well. They need to try and block off the advance of the heavy Goblin infantry so those archers are as safe as possible for as long as possible. The unit of Farmers of Buckland over there. They could use the Bjornings to find a few gaps, but there are so many spears that they're going to need to be careful of doing even that. Over here, the Sheriffs of the Farthings are moving forward, so activated immediately. Goblin Band are over here revealing themselves. The Sheriffs of the Farthings will need to avoid them. They may be trash, but they are still spears, and they will be ideal for dealing with that sort of thing. What's going on over there? Warg skirmishers are going after something. Well, they're turning back actually to try and go after the Sheriffs of the Farthings. Hobbitry and arms moving outwards. Tookish hunters moving back over here. I'm a little bit surprised Eclipse is not just opening up for these Tookish hunters as much as he possibly can. He is now doing so over here, but he's left it a bit too long, to be honest. Should have been firing a little bit sooner. I suppose the cave trolls weren't really something that could be stopped. He is going to get some point-blank volleys into the cave trolls, but like I said, you will bloody cave trolls up, and they are weaker than other trolls, but ultimately archers like this that have very basic damage, trolls are going to be able to withstand a few volleys of that easily, and once they get into melee they are going to be pummeling these Tookish hunters. They do manage to get one last volley off. That might be enough to kill off a troll or two. We shall have to wait and see. Meanwhile, the Goblin horde moves, and that is bad news. Bad news bears, meanwhile. Heavy Goblin archers getting into position. You can see here long bottom mob already in place. Mountaineer at Coaster on the way over here from Frodor Baggin. That will concern the Hobbit infantry as they continue to throw their stones downhill. And I think that the Orcish and Goblin factions here are definitely going about their business in the right way. Hyper-aggression is the way to go, because the longer you allow yourself to remain in sights of the Hobbit skirmishers, especially stuff like the Proudfoots over here, who are going to be doing fairly grisly damage to whatever it is they're shooting at, then the less likely your victory ultimately will be. Farmers of Buckland are going to need to get into melee here as well, because those Mountaineer at Coast are certainly going to have the beating of Hobbitry and arms as they continue to poke and prod. As we continue to move along here, these more exposed wings of the Hobbit army did make me concerned about their well-being. There's some snow trolls as well over here. 2 units of snow trolls by the looks of things. It gives them such a limited window to use all of these very valuable arrows in. The Farmers of Buckland are moving forward, who to be fair are a pretty good counter to the trolls. The huge amount of armour-piercing damage they do, you can see actually several of the snow trolls are falling by the wayside now, so they've done a pretty good job actually, the Hobbits, of shutting down this assault from Frodor Baggin's initial Goblin force. These 2 units of infantry will buckle eventually, of course, but the more arrows they can get downrange, the better it will be for them. Tookish hunters continuing to fire. There's several units of Tookish hunters over here which they really do need to be firing as many arrows off as they possibly can, but at this point the Orcish factions are starting to empty from the middle of the basin, and good shots will become harder to come by, you'd have to say. Meanwhile, over here, large-scale assault from Froggy moving uphill. Some of his units are shaken, but it's only the heavy Goblin infantry. The Mountaineer at Coast made of sterner stuff. As long as you can stop those Bjornings from completely wreaking havoc on your backlines. I mean, there's so many halberds in here that the Bjornings, it's a risky charge to make, but I suppose they don't have much of a choice at this point. Heavy Goblin spears are routing, however, so the Bjornings have had some sort of an impact. Hobbitry and arms are continuing to move forward. Also, the telltale whistle of crossbow bolts streaking through the air. They're going to be trying to get some good shots, undoubtedly. Plenty of openings over here as well. Mountaineer at Coaster trying to get up the hill here to intercept these 4 units, well, 3 units of Longbottom Mob and 1 unit of Tookish Hunters, so there's tons of pebbles being thrown. Low damage individually, but together they make a pretty decent cloud of armor-piercing damage. And with a charge from the Bjornings as well, this is enough to rout the Mountaineer at Coast. So I think the Hobbits actually have done a pretty decent job of looking for the stragglers that are pushing through the lines from the Orcs, trying to get into the skirmish lines and shutting them down. And they've done a good job of routing them over on this side, which is good. That's the sort of thing they will need to continue if they are to have success. Arrows and stones raining down on Frodor's goblin forces. Farmers of Buckland are holding the line all on their own, however, which will be a potential undoing of the Hobbits. This little force over here, meanwhile, has been cut off behind enemy lines for quite a while at this point, and unsurprisingly, Mr. Sneakman's goblins have washed over them. And those farmers of Buckland being outnumbered horribly by the goblins. Hobbitry in arms, continuing to hold the line a little bit better from the front, but now there's units coming in from the rear. They will be brought down low, especially seeing as Mountaineer at Coaster attacking them, a unit which ultimately is superior. Tookish Hunters are pursuing the cave trolls, which is maybe not the best idea. Sheriffs of the Farthings have been continuing to harass Madex's army here at the back, which is good, honestly. The more they can do this, the more they can keep Angmar away from the front lines, because Angmar, you would have to say, have got individually the most dangerous infantry units on the field from a red team perspective. The longer they can keep Angmar bogged down with these elements at the back end of the map, the better that front defence from the Hobbits will be. Defeat seems certain, that's unsurprising. Guardians of Khan Doom and Gundabad Guard together are going to be far too bulky for the likes of Hobbitry in arms to bring down. Warg Skirmishers, this is definitely a match where towards the late stage we won't be engaging in half speed, but there's so much going on because the Orcs are trying to scramble out from the basin they found themselves in. We will continue as is for the time being. Sheriffs of the Farthings not throwing their projectiles for the time being, perhaps seeing the Goblin Band as beneath their station. Perhaps they are correct about that. Not sure where the Great Eagles went. Are the Great Eagles still up here? Yes, they are. So they are being saved for later. And with the huge potential from their charge bonuses, that is unsurprising. Longbottom Mob, of course, have got those clubs in melee, which are armor-piercing, but their stats in melee leave a lot to be desired, and the Goblins are upon them. I think the best chance here is that the Goblins get routed by a rear charge from the Bjornings, but that window is closing because the Goblins are getting a lot of map control over here. And there you can see from the highest point of the cliffs, flaming shots being deployed. You can break the Goblins more easily. Under most circumstances, flaming shot is not a great idea, but considering the situation being what it is, routing being one of the Hobbit's best tools on this occasion, you can understand a more liberal use of that ammunition type. Longbottom Mob continuing to throw their stones in. That support very, very valuable in this front line as the Orc legions continue to push forward. So far, the Hobbit lines are holding. I'm not sure if they would be without that ranged support, however. Over here, they're still trying to clean up the 2 flanks, which is a testament to really how well the Hobbits have actually held on to things over here. The Snow Trolls have been recommitted. Some Tookish Hunters that presumably are out of ammunition being committed to the front line to try and stop this Goblin advance. And they are continuing to use their arrows as best they can. But there are Witcher and Blackguard coming in from the rear at this point. Firing into the backs of the Guardians of the Khan Doom. It is into the backs, to be fair. But unfortunately for this unit of Tookish Hunters, Death marches behind them. Witcher and Blackguard are here. And they will take no prisoners. And I'm not sure they'll even take a single loss against the Tookish Hunters, maybe 1 or 2, but they are completely unharmed at this stage in proceedings, so it's looking pretty bad for them. More on that later, however. They're in guard mode by the looks of things, these Tookish Hunters, continuing to fire, continuing to do as much damage as possible. They will do more damage with their bows than in melee, so they may as well engage in such things. They may be waiting as well to deploy the Great Eagles until after those Warg Skirmishers have been dealt with. Goblin Band and Gundabad Guard are over there. Have they cornered the Sheriffs of the Farthings? They have, unfortunately for Joey Wankanobi. Good use of their Goblin Band here, moving in a pincer movement. And will Joey regret not using those stones while he still could? May only have been on Goblin Band, but he finds himself flummoxed. He needs to get out of there quickly. He needs to use the mass of the cavalry and the speed to pull away in a safe direction. Goblin Band are in loose formation, so it should be easier to do than you would have thought. Proudfoots look like they're out of ammunition. They will be by far the best Hobbit unit for holding the line. We will actually go back up to 1 speed at this point. Oof, my... What is going on here with this frame rate? May just be because so much is happening so quickly. That's a little bit unfortunate, to be honest. I'm not entirely sure what the reasoning behind frames like this is. It may just be that there's so many engagements happening all at once and there's so many numbers of units dying. Hopefully this will even out as the fight goes on. It may also have something to do, of course, with the fact that Dunedain Rangers, those were the clear white projectiles of Rangers that were firing into the sides of those units there. Snaga Skirmishers are also doing their thing. There's so much damage being chucked out all across the field at this point. Hobbits are routing. But yeah, this should level out as the fight goes on. I hope so anyway. Hopefully it's not one of those replays that undergoes an exponential decay of frame rate. I can't imagine it would be because there's no structures on this map, and usually it is the map itself that causes frame drops like this, so I'm a little bit surprised, to be honest. Proudfoot Protectors continuing to use their crossbows. There are the Longbottom mob, doing a good amount of damage actually onto the Guardians of Khan Doom and routing them. Interesting to see that Angmar have got a heavy infantry unit on the front here. Mr. Sneakman is reforming his army back over there, so not being quite as aggressive as he was earlier. But of course, the longer he isn't being aggressive, the more time it gives for these Tookish hunters, a Longbottom mob, to deploy their ammunition. Now there is a bit of, I should say, of counter skirmishing going on here. Heavy Goblin archers doing their thing. There are the battling Brandy Bucks. Victory seems certain. Only a fool could lose this battle. But with Mountaineer at Coast arriving on the front line, I would imagine that is not to be the case for too much longer. Meanwhile, over on this side of things, frame rate is still a little juddery, but it's less... Oh no, I was lying all along. Still unfortunate. Over here as well, Hobbitry in arms continuing to fight. Bouncer forces evenly matched, so the farmers of Buckland really showing why they're such a dangerous unit. These snow trolls falling in droves. Still though, this Hobbit force will be... Well, I mean, it's very close to its demise really, with Angmar's units over here getting ready to attack them from the rear. Those Tookish hunters routing in the face of those Witch-Realm Blackguard. A bit of damage coming in actually. I assume from up on the cliffs. From on high, Bandobras archers are up there. There goes a Goblin General at the hands of the Proudfoot Protectors. I'm not really sure what to call this battle. It's not so much a siege because I guess it is an ambush battle. Pure and simple. Blackback Mountain Berserkers getting onto the front line, so yeah, that Hobbit force will be dealt with relatively quickly at this point. Tons of arrows being utilised here. There are heavy goblin crossbows in here too though, which will be doing a little bit of damage. Heavy goblin archers are in here. Arrows and bolts being traded between the two sides. The hobbits really need that trade to be favourable for them, however, more so than anything else. Dunedain Rangers getting into position to shoot. Heavy goblin infantry really struggling on the front line, as you would expect. They just don't have the quality. But they are merely here to wear the hobbits down. Speaking of which, it's only a matter of time at this point before it becomes more of a traditional siege, to be honest with you, as the hobbits dig into their position at the far end of the canyon. Because the outer elements of the hobbit ambush are being mopped up at this point. Mountaineer at Coast, again showing why they're a cut above of all the other line infantry units in this particular battle. Mountain Orc Berserkers charging up the hill as well. They're going to be intercepting the Tookish hunters. They do get one final volley off, shooting at something. Looks like they're going after the halberds in the backfield over there, but at least they got another volley off. Longbottom mob continuing to throw their stones down onto the low ground, going after those heavy goblin spears. At this point, it's just a case of trying to get as many kills as you can. Battling Brandy Bucks retreating to the higher positions. The Eagles have moved, and here they are. We shall follow the Eagles and see what it is they choose to charge into. Of course, they do technically count as cavalry, so if there is something in the way on the ground, they will descend to deal with it. I suppose they are going to try and charge into the backs of those Guardians of Khan Doom and Witch-Realm Blackguard. I mean, on Blackguard could be a good choice of target, to be honest with you, because you can flatten most of them, and those hobbits are holding them in place essentially, although perhaps not for too much longer. Yes, Medexa is going to have to turn his Guardians of Khan Doom around and essentially sacrifice them to the gods. I don't think Eclipse was targeting them either, so Medexa gets the better of that. He was paying more attention than Eclipse there, as he didn't have the Great Eagles targeted onto the right unit, and at this point, in melee, they don't have a melee attack. So they are going to get absolutely rolled in melee by anything, because they only have a charge. You need to cycle them in and out very quickly. You can see they're starting to die now, and it's too late. Eclipse has wasted his Great Eagles. What a shame. They're such an important unit that you can't really afford to lose micro on them like that. I mean, they could try and get away. They are going to charge into the Warg Skirmishers, but as they are technically a cavalry unit, the Great Eagles, the Warg Skirmishers have got a bonus against them in melee, and they've lost so many of their models at this point that their charge was not very impactful, and that's going to be the end of them. Such a shame. For such a high-profile unit as well, you can't really afford to lose micro on them like that. If you're just trying to like retreat battling Brandybucks from other parts of the map, priorities are a little skewed. Joey Wan Kenobi's front line, meanwhile, still holding. As the Uruks, yeah, the frame rate's starting to even out now that the battle is starting to condense itself down a little bit. Angmar Marauders. Plenty of ammunition still coming from on high. Bandobras. Archers continuing to do damage. Plenty of dead orcs and goblins as they try to make their way up the hill. This is going to be a new front line, and this is going to be one that the hobbits are going to hold on to for a good long time. Blackback Mountain Berserkers getting pretty far ahead of their support. They will do horrendous damage to battling Brandybucks, but numbers-wise they could lose a little bit too many for Froggy to be comfortable, but fortunately Angmar are on the way with some cannon fodder for them. That said, cannon fodder is still taking damage. In fact, I heard the firework launcher start to launch its projectiles, and it's going to do a lot of damage here. There's plenty of units they can hit. There is their own units over here, but they were already routing, so it's not too important. They're going to get plenty of hits there. They don't do much damage to individual units, the Watcher or the firework launcher, but they spread their damage out over a few units, and that is exactly what they did there. I have a feeling they're probably going to be using the firework launcher a bit sparingly, however, which is, I think, the best way to go about things. They're still firing it. It is risky because their own units are a little close to proceedings at this point. However, with the Blackbacks and the Hammerguard over here, I think the rewards of going after this little blob are too great, to be fair. You have to do it. And if you don't hit high value targets, you still stand a pretty good chance at hitting something. Love to see it. Well, there are still units back here. There's Warg Skirmishers. There's 2 Bjornings. And nothing else by the looks of things. Yeah, 1 Tookish Hunter that's routing. And this is Eclipse's general, Samwise himself, riding that bear. Warg Skirmishers leaving. Maybe they're going to go right the way around and try and intercept those archers that are on the cliff's edge. Because they could go right the way around, of course, the orcs, and they should if that's what if they intend to be victorious, because they can go right the way around and go about their business in that way. Meanwhile, Tookish Hunters still have ammunition up here, waiting for the opportune moment, but the opportune moment is disappearing. They need to be using their ammunition before they get engaged in melee. It's no use saving it if their only reward is to be stomped in melee by cave trolls. There's a bit of routing going on here from the Angmar Marauders. The Blackbacks still taking damage on the front line. Missiles and armour-piercing blows from the Brandybucks. There are the Hobbitry in arms as well. Another unit battling Brandybucks. Sieging, or we're settling into much more of a siege-type battle now. Look at all of those missiles coming in from both sides as well. It's not just from the Hobbits up on that cliffside, but it's also from the heavy Goblin Archers down here. So this really is a place you don't want to be, but the Hobbits have only got a limited amount of basic units over here, whereas Angmar, you can see their Hammerguard have been dealt with very well. So that's bad news for the attackers. The Hammerguard's such a useful unit potentially. We still have some Brandybucks over there. Plenty of units in reserve, however, for the Goblins and the Orcs, as you would expect. Angmar Marauders. pushing up the hill, and here are the battling Brandybucks. And again, as with most shock infantry, they're better when they get a charge, so will they get a downhill charge into those Angmar Marauders? Or will they just be used as a front line? These crossbows still have ammunition as well. Like, the combination of Proudfoot Protector crossbow fire and the Dunedain Rangers is such a potent mix of missiles that will be flung in. And that is going to be another good and devastating volley into a blob. Dunedain Rangers continuing to hide. The Ranger ammunition is of course a valuable commodity for them, and yeah, I think if the Hobbits do go on to lose this battle, trying to hide, but the thing is, it was so obvious they were up there. If any of the players were paying any sort of attention, they would have known the Tookish Hunters were there. So I think Joey missed a bit of a trick there, and he should have used his ammunition earlier, just so that they were utilised. The Heavy Goblin Archers do rout, but yes, the Tookish Hunters are winning for the time being, but the Cave Trolls have intercepted this unit at this point, and as soon as a unit of genuine infantry gets over here, you would imagine that would be pretty much that. Mountaineer at coast. I mean, to be fair though, this isn't exactly the best assault from the red team. Not an awful lot of their units have been committed up here, which is a bit weird because they could have swept away this entire Hobbit firing line, and they may be throwing away the opportunity to do so. Proudfoot Protectors, they're going to get down into melee as well. Angmar Marauders fighting hard on the front line alongside the Blackback Berserkers, but with spears, pikes and a bit of armour piercing there. This is a good mix of Hobbit units, and they still have reserves of course. It's still going to come down to missiles, I think, for the Hobbits. They're still going to need to do more damage with that sort of thing. Some routing Heavy Goblin Archers there, some depleted Heavy Goblin Archers still doing the business. Over here though is where the Orcs seem to have some more strength. Angmar Marauders continuing to push forward. They're not going to do very well against battling Brandybucks, so Angmar Marauders are too basic a unit to really have much joy there. They're getting some support, to be fair, from Heavy Goblin Archers, but with the inaccuracy of entry-level Goblin Archers, they're going to do some damage in the rear there. Proudfoot Protectors. Not shooting with the entirety of their unit, which is kind of strange. What have we got going on over here? Yeah, the Warg Skirmishers are going right the way around. And they are most interested in bringing down this firing squad, including Bandobras Archers, which of course could be so useful in melee as well, given their slight bit of utility from their armour piercing, which might be why these Tookish Hunters are going to be used as a bit of a sacrifice. No, they're actually leaving entirely. I'm a little bit confused as to what Joey is trying to do with his skirmishers, to be honest. He's been trying to save them, which is understandable, but he's got no infantry up here to protect them, so it's obvious that at some point the Orcs were going to be able to get around here and just have their wicked way with the Hobbits. And these Warg Skirmishers are going to stop the Tookish Hunters from fleeing as well. Arrows being utilised. These archers could be used to counteract the Warg Skirmishers quite nicely, but it's a risk that never really needs to be taken, in my opinion. Proudfoot's being added to the front line as the Heavy Goblin Spears also start to stack up in numbers. There's a huge amount of projectiles coming from the Goblin side of things, showing that they are not completely defenceless in those terms either, but you can see good amount of damage being laid down here. How much of it is going to be friendly fire though? It's a risky move. Oh, that camera shake though, that is so extreme. I wonder if there's a way they can remove that. I mean, I suppose they're not getting that much friendly fire, and they did do a decent amount of damage there. White Orc Fearmongers, Goblin King's Bodyguard, a worthwhile target, and I think the Hobbits kind of need to be a little bit risky at this point, because the longer this battle goes on in its current vein, their sides are exposed, which could prove to be a real problem. Having said that, the Tookish Hunters have been, let's be honest, victorious up here, which is a sign they really didn't commit enough forward, in my opinion. Mountaineer at coast are moving that way. They're just circumventing this Tookish Hunter line. Heavy Goblin crossbows getting shot. Tookish Hunters are going to intercept this one unit of Mountaineer at coast, which was trying to get in behind enemy lines, but that isn't enough of a flanking force to really be significant. The wargs are a bit of a different matter, and they are coming around here now, again circumventing that skirmish line, and that could be a real problem. One good charge into these dense front lines and it could be all over for the hobbits, especially considering that more and more it's looking like the orcs are the ones which are more freely using their skirmishers. So far so good though, the front lines are holding. Fireworks, will they be able to be used before being engaged in melee, as you can see here? Battling Brandybucks moving backwards, the Proudfoot Protectors, are they being left behind? I would highly question that move. But these Hobbit pikemen also continuing to hold back the hordes. There are some Angmar marauders. Dunedain Rangers starting to open up again now. There was a troll that was in behind the lines and he got killed pretty quickly. Meanwhile, farmers of Buckland reveal themselves, and to devastating effect as well actually. One unit of warg skirmishers took a charge from them when they were hidden, and causes them to rout those warg skirmishers as well. Tookish hunters perhaps seeing the opportunity to rout them as well. So close to the red line means there's no chance of them coming back really. And the wargs don't have the melee defense really, so Joey has actually gotten away with leaving his skirmishers occupied, but I think that's more down to the fact that the attackers elected not to go up there and really hunt them down. More so than it being a good call, in my opinion. Considering how important the skirmishers are to the Hobbits' chances of winning a fight like this. Hobbitry in arms victory seems certain. Proudfoot Protectors getting ever more depleted. As soon as these front lines burst, that would be the point where I would be very, very worried for the Hobbits, because if they start to get washed over, it could be really, really ugly. The Dunedain Rangers are going to shoot into that blob, which will do a lot of damage. There are the farmers of Buckland as well. The Hobbits, like I said, they're a really vicious faction to fight against. They're so awkward. There goes a Hobbit General at the hands of some halberds and some Goblin King's bodyguard. If these archers still have any sort of ammunition, they need to get ready to use them as the orcs push through this little mountainside path. I know that this is more of an eastern aesthetic, but this really should have been a more sort of northern look to this map, I think, seeing it is the Hobbits against the Goblins. It's not an unheard of confrontation, but it probably would be in the steppes of Khand or the plains of Rune. Proudfoot Protectors do still have some ammunition. Gundabad Guard pushing forward. Guardians of Khan Doom. Do the orcs have what it takes to break these front lines at this point though, considering the level of pike support that the Hobbits have? Because that is what is doing the business at this point, you would have to say. White Uruk Fearmongers are such a scary unit, but the Proudfoot Protectors do outrange them. Ooh. Damage being done there. Gundabad Guard with some hits being scored on them. Farmers of Buckland still hidden in the background, and are the Tookish hunters. The Hobbits may very well have paced themselves just so. Dunedain Rangers, I'm surprised they weren't being hit by Goblin skirmishers before this, to be honest with you, but they are now. Rangers don't do too well under pressure like this. Battling Brandybucks are routing. Still Proudfoot Protectors holding on to the front line resolutely. And it just goes to show the value of having pikes like this. Because even stuff like the Witchround Blackguard are struggling to push their way through, and this is why perhaps the early committal of all of those snow trolls against a single unit of farmers of Buckland was a bit of a poor judgment call from the orcs, because they could be so useful for battering through these lines at this point, getting in behind enemy lines, causing havoc, and then these pikes would not be so much of a pain for them. Swings and roundabouts, so I think both sides have misused some units. The Hobbits misused, I think, their Great Eagles. Their Sheriffs of the Farthings did okay, but more as a sort of delaying force more so than actual damage. The orcs, their trolls were so potentially such a useful thing. And they were always going to be important, considering the Hobbits rest, whenever they take to the field, they rest so much of their hopes on their skirmishers. We'll see if it's enough though. It is a closely contested thing at this point. Mountaineer at Coast do finally get in behind enemy lines, but I wonder how useful a single unit of 59 heavy infantry is going to be at this point. Turkish Hunters being engaged. They should beat the Turkish Hunters, even depleted as they are, but it wouldn't take too much to turn that fight into the Orcs' favour, and there's another unit of Turkish Hunters that can potentially be used. So much of the infantry force for the Hobbits, however, at this point the emergency infantry force is made up of Turkish Hunters, which is not going to be enough against stuff like Goblin King's Bodyguard, which is why it's still so important for skirmishers to be used. Up there on the high ground there you can see Bandobras archers using Flaming Shot. On this occasion Flaming Shot I think is actually a good idea. It's, like I said, one of the rare occasions where it is, because they need to rout some of these goblins, take away some of the numbers that the forces of evil still have. We'll see if that proves to be the case. White Orc Fearmongers moving forward. Yeah, at this point this front line has been broken, and I'm not entirely sure that this was communicated adequately at all, because Joey was putting his archers into position to shoot, not realising that the front line was completely collapsing. Again, that's partly observation, partly communication. All of these archers do still have ammunition, but now they really do need to be using up their ammunition, because they're really running out of time and wiggle room in which they can actually do so. And if the Hobbits do go on to lose this battle, I have to say, with all of the skirmishers that still have ammo left, they've got no one to blame but themselves, because they've held on to this for far too long, considering the situation they were in. Goblin King's Bodyguard are getting into melee up close and personal with the Bandobras archers. The AP will be useful, but in terms of overall quality of units, it's still a fight which is pretty heavily skewed against the Hobbits. There are the Fearmongers. Mountaineer at Coast continuing to slash their way through the Turkish Hunters. Those Proudfoots are going to rout off. Whatever happens to those Farmers of Buckland, I assume they were probably sent over here. The Firework crew was actually sent over here to hold the line. The Hobbits clad in red try and bunch up these forces as much as possible so they can shoot their missiles. Farmers of Buckland and Dunedain Rangers. Dunedain Rangers have a decent melee defense. Farmers of Buckland with good AP values. I don't know. I mean, the individual units at this point for the Hobbits are just not going to have the survivability to deal with the level of heavy infantry that's coming at them. So I'm not convinced they're going to be able to win this, but we'll see. I mean, the Farmers of Buckland get a charge off onto the Goblin King's Bodyguard. That is going to hurt the Goblin King's Bodyguard quite a lot. And among bodyguard units, they are on the lower end of the spectrum in terms of quality, as you would expect. Heavy Goblin crossbows menacingly getting into position, however. Turkish Hunters continuing to get bullied by the White Orc Fearmongers. Bandobras archers, are they out of ammunition at this point? If they are, then they need to be committed to melee, because that armour piercing is going to be terribly important, and they're a little bit bulkier than most Hobbits. Turkish Hunters moving across, better late than never. To be fair, it does look as though the Mountaineer at Coast were too depleted and injured to bring down this Turkish Hunter unit all by themselves, but at the very least they've done more damage. And this unit of Turkish Hunters still has ammunition again. To lose Micro on a unit that still has ammo is a cardinal sin for the Hobbits in a situation like this, because that is how you win the fight, and possibly, as we may see in this battle, how you lose it as well. Farmers of Buckland cutting down these heavily armoured orcs and goblins, doing the best that they are able. More heavy goblin infantry on the way forward, plenty more numbers. Not exactly the kind of unit that's a match winner under most circumstances, but what's going on out here? Angmar Marauders. I suppose better late than never to bring down all of these skirmishers, but these units need to get to the front line pretty quickly. There's still one Bjorning, and it is Eclipse's general, bullying Medexa's force. Again, they've simultaneously sent too much up to those cliffs and not enough. They should have sent that much up initially if they were that serious about bringing down those skirmishers. At the time they did it, though, they badly needed units on the front line to fully finish the Hobbits off. There are some Snaga skirmishers. Hobbits are now routing. The Snagas, if they still have some javelins, it could be pretty painful, this. More projectiles being used. Turkish Hunters point blank into the heavy goblin crossbows, and Snaga skirmishers being engaged by these hunters as well. Still this general live Goblin King's Bodyguard defeat is a distinct possibility. It goes to show the level of damage that the farmers of Buckland can chuck out, but I don't know, I think formation-wise I would question if they're going to win that or not. Farmers of Buckland still looking like they're going to be victorious. Really trying to push in. They really need to let their units do the business at this point though, the Orcs. They need to allow the lower melee defense and low armor values of the farmers of Buckland take its effect. Because if they continue to try and push through, they're going to take swings on the way past, and that will be pretty grisly. But a very competitive battle this though. Crossbows from the heavy goblin crossbows, if they can continue to fire, that could be absolutely vital, especially if they go after stuff like the Proudfoot protectors that do still remain. Dunedain Rangers on their way over. Gundabad Guard and Guardians of Kharndoom still being beaten by Tukish Hunters, but I think that's more because of the arrival of the Rangers than anything else, and with more Orcs on the way forward it could get a little bit dicey. I'd question bringing these Goblin King's Bodyguard off the front line. Oh no, I see what they're doing. And there goes 2 generals in quick succession. Fair play, bringing down that one Bjorning, and then they do rejoin the front line. Tukish Hunters showing themselves to be far superior to Snaga Skirmishers in melee, and there's still that heavy goblin crossbow unit which does rout now actually, so the Hobbits winning, and they're actually buckling this Orcish assault, and those crossbows so important if they still have ammunition. Counter-attacking in there, very well done, and Medexa's units lagging so far away, having gone up to that cliff. Could that yet prove to be a horrible mistake? More flaming shot being committed. Goblin band still routing in place. All of this flaming shot will probably be enough eventually as well to rout the heavy goblin infantry, which are already shaken. Not exactly known for their sturdiness, and yeah, with 2 lots of flaming shot coming in, I highly doubt their ability, especially considering farmers of Buckland hewing them down with their armor-piercing damage as well. The Witcher and Blackguard weren't here in enough numbers to really do the business here, and it's looking more and more like the Hobbits are going to get away with some of their questionable decisions. Which, fair enough, because the attackers made some very questionable choices as well. And it's a battle where panic can set in, I think. And panic can snowball across the length of the battle, because the Orcs have to be quick in what they're doing early on. The Hobbits have to make some snap decisions, and it goes from there. But I think the Hobbit skirmishes are going to be the reason for success. I mean, 109 Guardians of Kharndoom is nothing to be sniffed at as they move in column formation towards these Tukish Hunters. I think the battle elsewhere, however, as Medexa's reinforcements now finally arrive, is probably too grievous for the Orcs to recover, but you never know. If it comes down to pure melee, the bulkiness of the Guardians of Kharndoom, 2 units of them, could be enough, but still with some Bandobras archers with a bit of ammunition, a bit of support. Most of the Hobbit units, or a lot of the Hobbit units that still stand, have armor piercing as well, so the armor maybe not quite as useful as it would otherwise have been. What have we got going on back over here? Yeah, heavy goblin infantry routing at this point, so that's pretty much it for them. There goes another Misty Mountain general. Dunedain Rangers leaving this front line at this point because that's pretty much everything gone. There's still Mevan's general over here, but he won't last too long with the attentions of that many farmers of Buckland, so that fight done with. So the Orcs, all of their hopes now lie with Medexa's reinforcements and depleted Goblin Band and Angmar Marauders backing up 2 reasonably healthy units of Guardians of Kharndoom. If they had arrived earlier, they could have kept that 1 unit of heavy goblin crossbows safe, and that could have been enough to swing the whole battle, to be honest with you, but in the end that is not going to be the case, as the Guardians of Kharndoom even now are losing taste for battle. It's enough to rout them as well. So that is it, the Hobbits are going to be victorious. Close battle this though, very back and forth, very violent. And where are the rest of the goblin units? We have some from Mevan over here. Some of these heavy goblin archers. Just trying to pad their kills a little bit more. A unique kind of battle, that. A classic ambush. You see them a lot in modern Total War titles. It's a type of battle that you can engage in Most of the time, however, the terrain is rather boring. It's just trees either side of a road. Not quite so extreme here. The goblins, in the end. And someone must have returned home if the dog is barking that loudly. But yes. The terrain was extreme. The orcs had the numbers, though. I still think if they had used their trolls a little bit more wisely... There were several things both sides could have done, to be honest with you, to play better, but considering it's an ambush battle and considering everything happens in quick succession, strange decisions can be made. In the end, it added up to be more damaging for the Angmar Marauders are routing Dunedain Rangers chasing them. Ended up being more damaging for the orcs than it was for the hobbits, and a successful ambush. Good scenario that from Froggy. He's made a couple that we've seen somewhat recently. Long may that continue. Making scenarios is a time investment, so it's always good for the community when someone takes up the mantle of doing that. Bandobras archers there. I'm not sure what's left. Is it still those heavy goblin archers that are over here? It must have been.
Let all who remember this
as
day
they died.
Remember it as the day of our most glorious victory.
Glorious victory, eh? Lots of damage done there. Huge. I mean, considering the armies involved, it's perhaps not too surprising that the frames were struggling so. Because it wasn't only the attacking armies, but also the defending armies that had over 3,000 men per army, which is quite rare. I mean, this may actually be one of the, in terms of units on the field, one of, if not the biggest battle I've ever done, which sounds weird to say, but it is the truth, considering every single army had over 3,000 men, which is really, really rare. So, having a look at what the... Obviously, we can't see the names, which is a little bit unfortunate, but plenty of kills. 5,000, nearly 6,000 kills on that army there, but 4,025 kills being the lowest on your team is always a good thing. But it's also the kind of kill counts you need when you consider the amount of orcs and goblins that were opposing them. So very, very well done. Let's see what did the damage. The first army, Proudfoot Protectors, getting 505. They're such a useful unit in this sort of situation because of their ability to do range damage, but also the ability to bank up with their pikes. Dunedain Rangers, you know it's a good day when you see your Rangers get over 1,000 kills, 1,052. So it's always a little bit difficult to gauge how well skirmishers are doing. You can only really tell at the end when you consider what kills they got based on the type of unit they are. But in a battle like this, the Rangers were clearly used very, very well. Even the armor-piercing infantry was also committed at the right times, and even the Tookish Hunters, I think, leaving those archers on their own up on the cliffs could have been disastrous, but in the end it wasn't because the attackers didn't send enough up there to intercept them. Down here, Gandalf's Fireworks getting 153 kills. They chipped in, which is all you can really ask. An artillery piece like that can be quite wild and unpredictable. 448 kills on Dunedain Rangers, which is acceptable in a situation like this, I think, just about, considering the amount of orcs that are on the attack. Sheriffs of the Farthings delayed decently and actually did a decent amount of damage as well, to be fair. Tookish Hunters 458, though, punching well above their average. Just in general across the board, actually, the basic archers of the hobbits, perhaps as expected. And then down here, 703 kills on Eclipse's Bjornings, so he clearly used them quite well. I mean, the Great Eagles, even though I think they were used quite poorly, still got 118 kills, so that's fair enough. Tookish Hunters, Hobbitry in Arms with 421 kills. That's a lot for a basic unit of spears. Yes, they've got armor piercing, but still, it goes to show how well crafted the front lines were for the hobbits. And they really used their armies quite well, I think. Proudfoot Protectors. So yeah, high kills all around, but as expected in a battle like this, I mean, it kind of has to be, considering the numbers that are involved. It was the hobbit skirmishers in the ambush that were the key ingredient. Rangers, crossbows, artillery, but also the Tookish Hunters and the Bandobras archers are doing very, very well for basic archers. Picking their targets well, but again, considering so much of the enemy armies were made numbers focused, there are plenty of good targets for them to go after and really fill their boots in terms of kills. So, big thank you to Eclipse for sending this battle to me. Big thank you to Froggy for building this battle and allowing me to showcase it. And a big thank you to all of the players as well for being a part of this battle replay. As for moving forward, it's actually, again, it's weird considering I'm like more than a month ahead of schedule at this point, which is where I want to be, considering the unpredictability of what's going to be happening in the next while. I'm still not sure what's going to be going on, to be honest with you, and I said in the past couple of battle replays I think I would have a better idea. I'm now not so sure, though. There is a lot of malleability with the situation at this point. For the time being, though, it's best to assume, and I'm sure that I probably already would have said this on or via the YouTube community section, I would say that it's best to assume that for now at least the schedule will remain as is, but we'll see. It's one of those situations which can change on a dime, and it may have already changed, to be fair. It's pointless me really talking about this a month ahead of schedule, but yes. The next battle replay I will endeavour to make it Lango's Cardland Outpost battle, to be honest with you. It's been on the back burner for so long. I mean, this was something that I got relatively recently by my timescale, although it will still be a month away by the time it comes out. But I will do Lango's Cardland Outpost battle after this, I think, because I got sent it so long ago, and it's about time. Cardland Outpost, it's been a while since we've seen it anyway, so we'll do that one next, and we can finally get it off my conscience. I do like to do these custom scenarios as quickly as I possibly can, though, because people put a lot of effort into making these, so it's always good to do them, but I think it's about time we went back to Cardland Outpost and did that one. Got a few more replays as well that I can get through. We might even make a return to Thranduil's Halls, as much as it's a battle map we've seen an awful lot of in the past. It is one that we haven't seen in a while, and I have been sent one, so we might make a return there. At this point as well, the Grey Havens, I got sent 3 all at once. We already saw 1 back in January, but could see another Grey Havens battle at some point, sometime soon as well. But by all means, if you do have more battle replays to send me, you know where to find me on Discord. DM them to me, and I will endeavour to show them. Just sort of make it clear in your mind that I am running more than a month ahead of schedule at this point, so it will be a little while before you see it. It's not normal for a delay to be like Lango's Cardland Outpost replay, but that's because it's a battle map that I've already seen several times before, so that is a factor as well. Do bear that in mind. So yeah, again, big thanks to all the players, Eclipse and Froggy, for sending me it and building the battle itself. I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.